Hey guys, tonight we're curling up beneath a quilt of centuries, tracing the curious little story of one of humanity's smallest triumphs, the humble button. You might not think about it much, but somewhere on your pajama top or maybe on a favorite coat, there's a tiny disc that's been through millennia of invention, fashion, and, at times, hilariously unnecessary extravagance. Picture it. Damp animal hides scraping against your ribs, no underwear in sight, and gravity doing its best to expose you to every passing stranger. Yep, you're in the Stone Age, and you probably won't survive this wardrobe malfunction. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always fun to see who's drifting off from where. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking through a Paleolithic clearing. The wind smells of moss and old ash, and your feet are wrapped in fur. Barely. It's somewhere around 3000 BCE, give or take a few hundred years, and you've just invented clothing. Sort of. Technically, your outfit is a deer hide slung across your shoulders with some sinew, a bone awl, and a prayer. Clothing at this point is less about style and more about not freezing to death. But the challenge is keeping everything on. You don't have thread like we do today, and needles are more like sharp sticks with attitude. So how do you hold a wrap closed? You improvise. A leather thong wrapped around a wooden toggle, a thorn through two pierced edges, a clever twist of twine. And then, one day, maybe it's you or maybe it's someone in a cave beside yours, someone drills a little hole through a flat bead. It might have been decorative, but it turns out it can also fasten things. Suddenly, your deer hide cape doesn't blow open every time you sneeze. We're not calling it a button yet. In fact, we're mostly calling it something that works. Historians still argue whether early fasteners like these were invented for function or fashion. Some say they were more about showing status, like, hey, my bone disc has 2 holes, yours only has 1, peasant. Others believe utility came first, especially in colder climates where people layered more. A mainstream archaeological find backs this up. Buttons, well, button-like things, have been found in Mehrgar, one of the oldest known settlements in today's Pakistan, dating back over 5,000 years. These weren't just flat beads, they were shaped, polished, sometimes even carved. But here's the kicker, they weren't used to fasten anything. They were sewn directly onto garments as decorations. Which brings us to a strange little tidbit. For thousands of years, people were walking around with buttons that didn't actually do anything. Imagine that. It's like inventing the zipper and then hot gluing it shut for the vibe. You crouch beside a crackling fire, the stars wheeling overhead, and the person beside you points to their shell bead. Maybe they grunt approvingly. Maybe they try to trade it for your mammoth tusk earring. There's a communication here. This thing, small and smooth, says something about the wearer, and that's powerful. You've got your hand over your stomach, where the crude fastener digs in. You twist it, adjust it. There's an idea forming. Maybe, you think, it would be easier if this loop could hook around something shaped like a pebble, a flattened bone. You look down at your hand. The bead's still tied on your wrap. It clicks. Of course, buttons wouldn't really button for another few millennia. But here in the smoke and quiet, the idea takes root. The button begins its slow journey toward meaning something more. Open debates remain about whether these early pieces of ornamentation ever really functioned as closures, or whether that was a later innovation we're now projecting backward. It's a bit like finding an old coin and assuming it was a tool because it's round. But the possibility that early humans experimented with practical decoration, that's oddly comforting. It means that even when they were surviving day to day, they still had the brain space to make things a little prettier. Now, as you wander through this prehistoric night wrapped in hides, you begin to notice just how important that small detail is. A carved bead on your shoulder, a pierced disc on your wrist. They rattle softly as you walk. They make no sound at all when the wind dies down. But they're there. They're you. Somewhere deep inside the brain of every human who ever thought, hey, this wrap won't stay shut, a spark jumped across time. We didn't need it to be perfect yet. We just needed it to start. You're squatting in the dust of a busy ancient street. The sun's high, the air smells like wet clay and roasted lentils, and merchants are hollering in a language no one's spoken aloud in thousands of years. You're in the Indus Valley now, around 2500 BCE, and you're about to watch a society quietly become a little more buttoned up. And not with zippers, toggles, or laces, nope, with tiny hand-carved shell discs. You're in Mohenjo-Daro, one of the crown jewels of the Indus civilization. It's tidy here, seriously, eerily tidy. There are city blocks, there's a sewage system, you've got public baths and baked brick houses with actual drainage. And in a little workshop under an awning of woven reeds, someone is painstakingly drilling holes into a piece of conch shell. This is our first hard evidence of something button-like. Archaeologists have unearthed these little discs, flat, pierced, often polished, and they're beautiful. Some are etched with patterns, some with images of animals. There's no sign of thread between holes, though, and no buttonholes nearby. So what gives? The prevailing theory is they were ornamental, like brooches, but without the pokey bit. Decorative medallions sewn on garments with no intention of fastening anything. Still, as you sit there watching, you get the sense that this act, the shaping of something small and round and smooth, isn't just decorative. There's an itch of utility in it, a sense that the people of this valley were building more than cities. They were building systems, and a system needs closures. Historians still argue whether these shell buttons were used to fasten anything at all. Some suggest they adorned turbans or sashes, perhaps marking social status or trade affiliation. Others think they were mere embellishments, like the embroidery on a jean pocket. Pretty, but don't try and put change in it. But you've noticed something else. Every time someone walks past you, their clothing moves. Carefully. Tunics don't flap wildly, robes aren't flying open. There's control here, structure. Maybe it's from folds, maybe it's a hidden tie, or maybe, just maybe, there's something holding things together in ways that haven't survived in the archaeological record. You run your fingers along the edge of one of these buttons. It's warm from the sun, cool underneath. The holes are tiny, cleanly drilled, and perfectly symmetrical. Whoever made this had steady hands and a good eye. And it gets better. The shells, they're not local. They've traveled. Some came from coastal regions hundreds of miles away. Someone thought these humble little discs were worth the effort to trade, carry, carve, and display. Here's your quirky detail of the night. Some of the buttons found in Indus sites seem to have traces of dye or pigment. Not just plain shell, colored shell. Imagine going through the effort of painting something smaller than your thumbnail, then sewing it to your tunic. That's not about warmth, that's about expression. Or maybe courtship. Or possibly just one-upshipmanship. Ravi has 4 red buttons? Cheh, peasant. Still, a question lingers. Why didn't they use them to close things? It could come down to climate. The Indus region was warm. Layers weren't always necessary. Tunics and robes flowed freely. Fasteners weren't a daily requirement the way they might be in colder climates. Why fix what doesn't flap? But fashion is fickle, and culture shifts like a river in flood season. The idea of a decorative fastener may have traveled from here through trade routes to other parts of the world. Maybe someone picked up an Indus button, turned it in their hand, and thought, what if this went through a slit in the fabric? The answer may never be clear, but you imagine the moment someone tried it for the first time. A snap, a tug, a secure closure, a grin. Open scholarly debates remain about just how much the Indus civilization influenced fashion systems beyond its borders. Some archaeologists argue for a more isolated cultural arc, while others see these shell discs as an early sign of connected creativity, a meme passed from mind to mind, city to city. The sun's lowering now, and the shell worker's hands are still busy. You feel the rhythm of the carving, the soft scrape of abrasive stone, the puff of breath as dust is blown away. You close your eyes. The world smells of salt and lime. You picture yourself walking away with one of these buttons sewn to your own tunic, proud and ever so slightly fancier than your neighbor. That, you think, is how these things start, not with intention, but with curiosity, with vanity, with the simple joy of making something both small and perfect. And somewhere, deep under layers of earth and time, those buttons still lie waiting, quiet, decorative, watching. You blink, and now you're in a windier place, surrounded by sheep, stone walls, and the smell of smoked fish. Welcome to ancient Scandinavia, around 1000 CE. You're in a Norse village, and things here are all about layers, wool, and not freezing to death. And now the humble button is no longer just a fashion whim. It's about survival. You shuffle inside a longhouse. It's dim and smoky, lit by a central fire. There are pelts hanging from beams, clunky iron tools lined up like museum pieces. A woman by the fire is pulling a child's tunic closed, not with a belt, not with a pin, but with what looks like a small round toggle made of antler. It slips through a slit in the wool with satisfying precision. It stays shut. No flapping, no frostbite, just quiet, practical closure. Now this feels like progress. The Norse people weren't just raiders and seafarers. They were engineers of the everyday. They dealt with freezing winds, wet sleet, and the kind of biting cold that makes you seriously regret living north of everything. Fastening your clothes mattered. Suddenly, a button isn't just a decoration, it's a shield. What's interesting here is how they made these closures. No seashells this time. The materials were local. Bone, antler, horn, wood. You'd see buttons carved with patience and care, often slightly domed, sometimes dyed with soot or berries for contrast. Some even had carvings or motifs, runes maybe, or spirals. The kind of detail that hints, yes, I live in a frozen forest, but I also have taste. And here's the historical nugget of the hour. While many believe buttons weren't widely used for fastening until centuries later, there's growing archaeological evidence that Northern Europeans were well ahead of the curve. Excavations have revealed garments with reinforced slits, actual buttonholes, dated to the early medieval period. Not just decoration, but function. Yet, historians still argue whether these closures count as real buttons. You see, to earn that glorious title, a button must work with a buttonhole, an engineered pair. Some argue the Norse used loops of leather or cord rather than slits, which technically wouldn't qualify under the snootiest definitions. But then again, who's wearing the button? The archaeologist or the farmer? Meanwhile, you're watching a young boy try to fasten his wool tunic himself. He misses the hole, then again. A third time, and click! It catches. His face lights up. It's the smallest victory, but you can feel it in your bones. In this cold world, even a button is cause for celebration. And now, your quirky tidbit. The Norse didn't limit buttons to tunics. Some helmets, yes, helmets, used them too. In certain burial sites, archaeologists have found partial fastenings around headgear, speculated to keep linings in place or attach fur for warmth. Because why just wear armor when you can wear cozy armor? You step outside and hear the wind howl. The fjord in the distance slaps against the rocks, gray and sullen. And you realize these people weren't just using buttons to stay warm. They were creating a system of layered garments, each piece held together with fasteners small enough to go unnoticed, yet critical enough to make the difference between enduring winter or falling apart in it. You trudge up the path and pass a merchant with a small roll of antler toggles in a leather pouch. He's come to trade. One button for a bit of honey, maybe. A pair for a strip of cloth. These objects, small as they are, now have value. Utility becomes currency. There's a quiet beauty in that, isn't there? A reminder that even in a world of axes and longships, progress often comes in the form of a round little thing you can lose in your pocket. Somewhere near the fire, a woman is humming as she threads twine through holes in her husband's new coat. You hear the whisper of wool rubbing wool, the tick of bone on fabric, and it calms you. Life here is hard, but methodical, thoughtful. You see that even these people, famed for conquest, cherish the comfort of a tunic that stayed shut. And while most textbooks skip over the tiny domestic marvels, you know better now. This isn't just a Viking story, it's a button story, and you're wearing it. You wake to the faint clatter of hoofbeats on cobblestones. There's a crisp scent in the air, roasted chestnuts, faint perfume, and freshly washed linen. Welcome to 13th century France. You're in a bustling medieval town where fabric rules the streets like royalty. And somewhere nearby, the button is about to get its moment. Down the winding alleyways, merchants call out prices in sing-song French. Velvet, brocade, fine linen. These are no longer for warmth alone. They're declarations. Fashion isn't just emerging. It's blooming, preening, and asking for attention. And that's where buttons strut onto the scene. You brush past a tailor's workshop, the kind that smells faintly of beeswax and dye. Inside, a young man leans over a padded doublet, stitching tiny glass buttons along the front in a perfect row. They sparkle like dewdrops. Not a single one is fastened yet, but you know they will be, because this is the button's rebirth. Not just practical, not just pretty, but provocative. Historians point to this time, specifically in 13th century Germany and France, as the era when the button and the buttonhole finally fell in love. Like a medieval power couple, garments started using dozens of these closures, tightly spaced down sleeves, bodices, and leggings. It wasn't just for convenience. It was a way to shape the body, hug the waist, reveal the wrist, and, let's be honest, show a little skin when desired. You stroll past a noblewoman having her bodice buttoned by a servant, each closure a gentle pop. Her outfit curves and smooths into place like armor made of fabric. She glances into a polished metal mirror, adjusts a lace cuff, and smiles with calculated ease. You suddenly understand something crucial. The button has become sensual. And here's a mainstream historical gem. By the mid-14th century, laws had to be written limiting how many buttons a person could wear. Yup, sumptuary laws. Because apparently too many buttons were a scandal waiting to happen. French and English authorities alike began to say no more than X buttons per sleeve, and don't even think about matching buttons on your boots. Why? Because buttons let you wear tighter clothes, which meant accentuated limbs, torsos, and, cue medieval pearl clutching, desire. Of course, historians still argue whether this fashion explosion was born in courtly circles or from military necessity. Some claim that tighter clothes allowed knights to move better, and buttons just followed suit. Others say nobles wanted something fancier than pins and laces to separate them from the common tunic-wearing crowd. Either way, it's clear buttons now belong to the upper class. If you wore buttons, you had coin, or at least aspirations. And now, your quirky nugget. Monks were not fans. Some monastic rules forbade the use of buttons entirely, calling them tools of vanity and temptation. One 14th century abbey even had a rule against unseemly fastenings, which sounds suspiciously like someone got caught with a sleeve full of satin-covered buttons at midnight prayers. Scandalous. You follow a merchant cart down toward the town's central square. On it, tucked between bolts of cloth and skeins of thread, is a little wooden box. Inside, gleaming in the afternoon sun, are buttons of all shapes. Copper, enamel, even tiny ones shaped like flowers and stars. One young boy eyes a cobalt blue one the size of a thumbnail. It costs a week's wages. He doesn't buy it, but he'll remember it. The market buzzes around you, and you start to notice tailors are building whole outfits around buttons now. Gowns with cascading rows, cloaks that button diagonally across the chest, sleeves with rows so tight they need a button hook tool just to fasten. Buttoning up becomes an act of patience and sometimes a two-person job. But hey, style has its price. And while all this glitz and tailoring unfolds, the average person, say a washerwoman or a mason, is still wearing loose tunics tied with cords. For them, buttons remain out of reach. For now. But things are shifting fast. Mass production isn't here yet, but demand is climbing. Button makers are real trade now. And those tiny things? They're a growing economy. As you duck into a tavern and settle by the fire, you see a bard warming his hands. His jerkin is fastened with leather-backed pewter buttons shaped like tiny moons. He winks at you. Every one of these, he says, was worth the song I traded for it. It's charming, and suddenly you understand that the button isn't just fastening clothes anymore. It's fastening stories, identity, desire, discipline, decorum. It's a tiny circle of change in a world obsessed with hierarchy and appearances. And if someone asked you, right now, what the most scandalous invention of the 1300s was, you'd lean back, sip your spice cider, and whisper, "The button." You stir awake again, this time to the steady rhythm of wooden looms and the low murmur of early factories. The sun outside glows a little less golden, a little more smoky. You're in the heart of the Industrial Revolution, England, late 18th century, somewhere between Birmingham and Manchester. And the world is whirring faster than ever before. Cotton's booming, machines are humming, and in the corners of all this clamor, buttons are multiplying. You step into a brick workshop that smells of oil and steam. Inside, women and children squat at rows of long benches, fingers flying over stacks of bone, horn, and, wait, mother of pearl. A teenage girl uses a foot-powered lathe to smooth the surface of a button carved from a mussel shell. It glints in the light like a little moon, then clinks into a growing pile of siblings. There's no glamour here, no royal sleeves or noble silk. Just repetitive motion, quick hands, and the rise of something you never expected: mass production. Here's your mainstream fact for the day. By the early 1800s, England had become the epicenter of the global button industry, especially Birmingham, where entire families worked in button making. Some in dark factories, others in crowded homes. Buttons of all sorts, metal, glass, shell, horn, were now being turned out by the thousands. You could buy them in bulk. You could match them perfectly. For the first time, buttons weren't precious. They were plentiful. Of course, that didn't mean all buttons were equal. Rich gentlemen strolling down Pall Mall in London still wore gold and enamel buttons, sometimes adorned with miniature portraits or even hair. Yes, human hair, delicately sealed under glass. Think of it as the 19th century version of a custom profile pic. If you were wealthy, buttons became conversation pieces, like tiny wearable lockets whispering, "Yes, I am someone." But for the working class, it was all about function. Uniforms, coats, undergarments, everything now had buttons. A railway worker might fasten his wool jacket with 510 buttons stamped with the company's crest. A maid might wear a calico dress that buttons all the way up to her throat, practical but stiff. The buttons clack when she moves, like tiny footfalls on cobblestones. You glance down at your own borrowed outfit, linen shirt, heavy wool vest, leather boots with brass buttons up the sides. A lot of buttons. They aren't delicate, but they're dependable. They do their job. And if one falls off, you just buy another. Cheap, replaceable. The button has gone democratic. And here's a quirky detail you won't find in school books. Some Victorians had button fetishes. Not the scandalous kind, more like hobbyists gone mildly obsessed. People collected buttons the way others collected butterflies. There were entire clubs, exhibitions, and competitions for the most charming floral-patterned mother-of-pearl button, or the most symmetrical military-issue brass. Button fever was real. The Victorians loved their tiny trophies. Of course, not everyone was thrilled. Some critics worried that the flood of mass-made buttons signaled a loss of craftsmanship. Where were the unique details, the hand-carved charm? Historians still argue whether industrial button making elevated fashion or flattened it. Some say it allowed style to spread beyond class lines. Others say it ushered in an era of sameness. You decide, leaning back against a stone wall outside the factory, that it probably did both. Isn't that how most revolutions go? As the century turns and Queen Victoria ages, buttons get a little gloomy. Mourning fashion rises. Black jet buttons become a thing, shiny and deep, like fossilized tears. A widow might wear a whole dress fastened with somber buttons carved from Whitby jet, a fossilized wood found only in England. It's as if even the buttons are grieving. But don't worry, there's still mischief to be found. In seaside towns, pranksters start selling trick buttons to tourists. Buttons that squeak, squirt, or even pop open with secret compartments. You buy one and hide a sugar cube inside, just because. Further afield, American button makers are catching up fast. In Connecticut, the 1840s see the rise of mass-produced shell buttons thanks to new machinery. The Mississippi River becomes a source of freshwater mussels, and the U.S. joins the button race with gusto. By 1900, American factories are producing millions of buttons annually. Everything from plain workwear snaps to elegant dress buttons for the booming middle class. And somewhere in all this whirlwind of industry, you're reminded of something funny. The button hasn't changed its core job. It still fastens, still holds things together. But now it's everywhere. On the battlefields of Crimea, on stagecoaches in Nebraska, on corsets in Vienna. You wander past a row of drying lines in a worker's courtyard. Tiny shirt buttons dangle like pearls along the fabric. A child runs past, one button missing from his shirt, flapping open like a wing. His mother clucks, shakes her head, and sews it back on without breaking stride. And so, by candlelight or gas lamp, the humble button becomes a fixture in the rhythm of everyday life. From paupers to politicians, everyone buttons up. The circles may be small, but they've quietly organized the entire wardrobe of the modern world. You pause for a moment and listen to the soft clicks around you, the fastening of a dress, the quiet pat of a worker sealing a button mold, the sleepy murmur of someone unbuttoning their collar after a long day. It's gentle, isn't it? This little sound that tucks the day away.